Welcome, dear viewers. For more thrilling and exclusive stories every week, become a member. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy your coffee. We sent rovers to Mars to take pictures. We got more than we bargained for. Hidden in plain sight, etched into a vast plain of Martian sand, were symbols. They weren't natural. They were precise, mathematical, and covered an area larger than Texas. We've been studying them in secret for years. Then, last week, as a massive dust storm swept across that region, the symbols shifted, rearranged themselves. It wasn't a message, it was an activation. My name is Tyler Blackwood, and I've been working at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena for 3 years. Started as a data analyst, fresh out of Caltech with dreams of discovering life beyond Earth. Funny how careful you should be about what you wish for. The morning everything changed, I was nursing my 3rd cup of coffee and staring at thermal imaging data from Perseverance when Dr. Harrison called me into his office. Harrison was old-school NASA, crew-cut, square-jawed, the kind of guy who still wore a tie to work every day even though the dress code had been casual for decades. "Close the door, Tyler." That should have been my first warning. Harrison never asked anyone to close doors. The man lived for transparency, always said secrets were what killed the space program's credibility back in the day. He pulled up a classified folder on his screen, one I'd never seen before, with a designation that made my stomach drop, Umbral 7. Below it, in smaller text, Xenological Containment Protocol. "You're being reassigned," he said, not looking at me, "effective immediately." "Reassigned? Sir, I'm in the middle of analyzing..." "The Canyon project needs someone with your background." He handed me a manila envelope, the old-fashioned kind with a wax seal. Actual fucking wax. "Report to Facility 19 tomorrow at 0600. Everything you need to know is in there." I opened my mouth to ask what the Canyon project was, but Harrison was already standing, extending his hand for a shake that felt too much like goodbye. "Tyler," he said, his voice softer now, almost fatherly. "Some discoveries change everything. This is one of them. Follow the protocols exactly. No exceptions, no shortcuts, and whatever you do..." He paused, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "Don't let curiosity get the better of you." I drove home that night with the envelope burning a hole in the passenger seat. My apartment in Eagle Rock felt smaller somehow, like the walls had moved closer together while I was gone. I poured myself a whiskey, Jameson, nothing fancy, and broke the wax seal. Inside were coordinates to a location in the Mojave Desert, about 2 hours northeast of LA, a security clearance form, and a single sheet of paper with a list of instructions that made no sense at all. At the top, in bold letters, Operational Guidelines, Project Umbral 7. Below that, 7 numbered items that would haunt my dreams for months to come. The last thing in the envelope was a photo, aerial view of a facility I'd never seen before, built into what looked like a natural canyon. At the bottom, someone had written in red ink, "Welcome to your new life." I spent that night reading the operational guidelines until my eyes burned. 7 rules that seemed designed by someone who'd lost their mind. Rule 3 made me laugh. Actually laugh, until I realized nobody jokes about security protocols at this level. The drive to the Mojave started before dawn. Highway 14 stretched endlessly ahead, sagebrush and Joshua trees marking my passage into the middle of nowhere. The GPS coordinates led me past Ridgecrest, past the Naval Weapons Station, into territory that didn't exist on civilian maps. 20 miles of dirt road later, I found the checkpoint. 2 guards in desert fatigues flagged me down at a gate that materialized from the landscape like a mirage. Behind them, a canyon opened up, one of those geological scars that looked like God had dragged a knife through the earth. The facility was built into the canyon walls, concrete and steel disappearing into natural rock formations. "Tyler Blackwood," I said, handing over my clearance papers. The younger guard, name tag read Voss, scanned a handheld device over my documents. "Welcome to nowhere, sir. Follow the yellow line once you're inside. Don't deviate. Don't stop. Don't look into any rooms that aren't your destination." "What happens if I do?" Voss exchanged a glance with his partner, an older guy with sergeant stripes. You'll find out why we have 7 rules instead of 6. The facility's interior defied logic. Corridors branched and twisted deeper into the earth than should have been possible. Emergency lighting bathed everything in amber, giving the walls a sickly glow. My footsteps echoed despite the carpet, industrial grey, the kind that absorbed sound and hope in equal measure. I followed the yellow line painted on the floor, passing doors marked with symbols I didn't recognize. Some were sealed with what looked like blast doors. Others stood slightly ajar, revealing darkness beyond. The yellow line ended at Laboratory C7. Inside, 3 men huddled around a bank of monitors displaying data streams I couldn't pass. The room smelled like ozone and burnt coffee. You must be Blackwood. The speaker turned from his console, a wiry guy in his 40s with prematurely grey hair and the pallor of someone who hadn't seen sunlight in months. I'm Dr. James Kellerman, Project Supervisor. These are my colleagues, Dr. Wu and Specialist Gordon. Wu looked like he'd been awake for days, his lab coat wrinkled and stained. Gordon wore military fatigues, but no visible rank insignia. Neither offered to shake hands. Before we begin, Kellerman said, I need to know you've read and understood the operational guidelines. I nodded. I've got questions about... Questions later. First, you need context. He gestured to the largest monitor. 6 months ago, our deep space monitoring array detected an energy signature from Mars. Not solar radiation, not cosmic background noise, something else entirely. The monitor showed a spectrographic analysis that meant nothing to me. What kind of energy? The kind that doesn't exist in our physics textbooks. Wu spoke for the first time, his voice hoarse. Quantum fluctuations in ordered patterns, repeating sequences that suggest artificial origin. Gordon stepped forward. The patterns match mathematical constants, pi, phi, prime number sequences, but arranged in ways that create side effects. What kind of side effects? Kellerman's expression darkened. The kind that necessitates 7 very specific rules for anyone working in this facility. He led me to a workstation equipped with quantum computers I'd only read about in theoretical papers. Your job is to analyze transmission data from the source, map the patterns, find correlations with terrestrial phenomena. Terrestrial phenomena? Things have been happening, Blackwood. Here on Earth, small at first. Electromagnetic anomalies, radio interference, equipment malfunctions, but they're accelerating, getting stronger. Wu pulled up a global map dotted with red markers. Incidents reported in the last 90 days. Pattern recognition suggests they're not random. The markers formed a rough spiral, starting sparse and growing denser towards some invisible center point. I traced the progression with my finger, noting how the concentration increased along specific latitude lines. The epicenter appears to be moving, I said. Not moving, Gordon corrected. Approaching. Something in his tone made my spine prickle with static electricity. Approaching what? Kellerman handed me a tablet loaded with classified files. Read these tonight. Tomorrow we'll show you the source data. But Tyler, he paused, ensuring he had my full attention. The rules exist for a reason. They're not suggestions. They're not guidelines. They're the difference between going home at the end of your shift and becoming another data point in our incident reports. I spent the rest of the day reviewing personnel files and incident reports that painted a picture of scientific discovery gone wrong. Researchers transferred without explanation, equipment failures that defied troubleshooting, and always, underlying everything, references to protocols that seemed designed around managing the impossible. My temporary quarters were a concrete box with a cot, a desk, and a window that looked out into the canyon's depths. Below, floodlights illuminated geological formations that hurt to look at directly, sedimentary layers that twisted and folded in ways that made my eyes water. I opened the tablet and began reading. The first file was labeled Initial Discovery, Mars Orbital Reconnaissance. Date stamped 8 months ago. The summary made my hands shake. Subsurface scanning reveals artificial structure embedded in Martian geology. Estimated age, 4.6 billion years. Composition unknown. Energy output increasing by 0.3% daily since detection began. Below that, in handwritten notes, activation sequence appears to correlate with Earth-based incidents. Recommend immediate containment protocols. I kept reading until exhaustion forced my eyes closed. My dreams were full of spiral patterns and numbers that arranged themselves into shapes my mind couldn't process. And underneath it all, a low humming that seemed to come from the walls themselves, a frequency that bypassed my ears and resonated directly in my bones. Morning came with an alarm that sounded like a submarine dive klaxon. I stumbled to the small mirror above my sink and barely recognized the face staring back. Hollow eyes, skin that looked like old paper. The dreams had lasted all night, filled with geometric progressions that folded in on themselves like origami made of mathematics. Breakfast was served in a cafeteria that could have been lifted from any corporate office building, except for the lack of windows and the way conversations stopped whenever I walked past occupied tables. Scrambled eggs that tasted like cardboard, coffee that could strip paint, and the distinct feeling that everyone knew something I didn't. Kellerman found me picking at my food. Ready for the real tour? We descended through levels I hadn't known existed. Each floor required different security clearances, biometric scans that mapped the blood vessels in my retinas. The elevator shaft was carved directly into bedrock, smooth walls that reflected our distorted images like a funhouse mirror. Level 7, Kellerman announced as the doors opened. This is where it gets interesting. The corridor here was different, wider, with walls that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Temperature dropped noticeably, and the air carried a metallic taste that coated my tongue. The rules, I said. When do I learn what they actually mean? Right now. He stopped at a reinforced door marked with biohazard symbols and what looked like warning text in languages I couldn't identify. But first, you need to understand what we're dealing with. Inside, the room opened into a space that defied the facility's architecture. Circular chamber, maybe 50 feet across, with a domed ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. In the center sat equipment I'd never seen before. Quantum processors networked with devices that looked more like art installations than scientific instruments. Wu was already there, hunched over a workstation that displayed real-time data streams from Mars. Energy output increased another 2% overnight, he said without looking up. The correlation is becoming undeniable. Show him the footage, Kellerman said. Wu's fingers danced across holographic interfaces, pulling up satellite imagery from Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. The screen filled with overhead shots of the Martian surface, specifically the Acidalia planitia region where the symbols had been discovered. This was taken 6 months ago, Wu said. The patterns were subtle at first, barely visible variations in surface texture across hundreds of square kilometers. But once you saw them, you couldn't unsee them. Geometric shapes arranged in spirals that reminded me of nautilus shells or galaxy formations. And this was yesterday. The same region but transformed. The patterns had shifted, reorganized themselves into new configurations that hurt to look at directly. Not because they were bright or disturbing, but because they seemed to exist in more dimensions than my eyes could process. The dust storm, I whispered. It wasn't coincidence. No, Kellerman said. It was camouflage. Something down there used the storm to mask its movement, to reconfigure itself without detection from orbital assets. Wu pulled up spectrographic analysis showing energy signatures that pulsed in regular intervals. The frequencies match brainwave patterns, specifically delta waves associated with deep sleep and unconscious processing. My mouth went dry. You're saying it's trying to communicate with sleeping minds? We're saying it already is. Gordon emerged from the shadows near the chamber's edge, carrying a manila folder thick with documentation. Which brings us to the operational guidelines. He handed me the folder. Inside were incident reports, medical evaluations, and 7 pages of rules that suddenly made terrifying sense. Rule 1. No personnel shall remain in Laboratory C7 for more than 4 consecutive hours without mandatory rest periods. The explanation was clinical. Extended exposure to quantum field fluctuations has been linked to increased susceptibility to external neural influence. Rule 2. All sleeping quarters must be equipped with electromagnetic shielding rated for Class 5 interference. Rule 3. Personnel experiencing dreams of geometric patterns, mathematical sequences, or spiral formations must report to medical immediately. I thought about my dreams from the night before and felt something cold settle in my stomach. Rule 4. No direct visual observation of source data without protective filtering. Minimum safe viewing time, 15 minutes per 8-hour shift. Rule 5. Any equipment malfunction involving spontaneous pattern generation requires immediate evacuation and decontamination procedures. Rule 6. Communication with family members or external contacts is restricted to designated time periods and monitored channels only. Rule 7. In the event of facility-wide alarm designation, Crimson, all personnel must proceed immediately to designated safe rooms and await further instruction. The last one, I said, looking up from the pages. What triggers Crimson? Kellerman and Wu exchanged glances. Gordon checked his watch, a nervous habit I was beginning to recognize. Direct contact, Wu said finally, when the thing on Mars stops broadcasting and starts visiting. The room's lighting flickered, just once, barely perceptible. But in that brief moment, the quantum processors emitted a harmonic tone that resonated in my chest cavity like a struck bell. It's learning, Kellerman continued, adapting. The energy signatures have evolved 17 times since we began monitoring. Each iteration shows increased sophistication, better integration with terrestrial electromagnetic fields. Gordon opened his folder to a page covered in global incident reports. Phase 1 was preparation, mapping our infrastructure, identifying key communication nodes, learning our behavioral patterns. Phase 2 began 3 weeks ago. What's Phase 2? Direct neural interface experiments, starting with isolated populations, remote facilities, places where disappearances won't trigger immediate investigation. The list of affected locations read like a geography lesson in isolation. Antarctic research stations, deep-sea platforms, remote mining operations, places where people worked in small groups, cut off from regular contact with the outside world. The good news, Wu said with grim humor, is that we're probably not in immediate danger. This facility was designed specifically to house something like this: shielding, isolation protocols, emergency containment systems. The bad news? The thing on Mars isn't limited to broadcast communication anymore. 3 days ago, we detected localized space-time distortions at affected sites. Brief, lasting only microseconds, but consistent with theoretical models for quantum tunneling across interplanetary distances. I stared at the data, trying to process implications that stretched my understanding of physics beyond its breaking point. You're telling me it can physically manifest here, on Earth? We're telling you, Kellerman said, that the rules exist because we've already seen what happens when they're broken. He pulled up personnel files for the facility's original research team. 12 names, with status updates that painted a grim picture. 3 transferred to psychiatric facilities. 2 missing, presumed dead. 5 relocated to positions that didn't officially exist. The remaining 2 are Wu and myself, he finished. Everyone else who worked on this project during the initial phases is either gone or... He gestured toward the quantum processors, which had begun displaying patterns that seemed to writhe and shift when viewed peripherally. Changed. A soft chime echoed through the chamber, the sound of an incoming transmission. Wu's hands flew across his controls, isolating the signal and routing it through protective filters. Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter is reporting anomalous readings, he announced. The source has entered what appears to be active mode. On the screen, the Martian surface erupted in electromagnetic cascades that painted the landscape in false-color auroras. The ancient device, hidden beneath 4.6 billion years of geological sediment, was fully awake now, and it was looking back at us. Time to test those rules, Gordon muttered, reaching for the facility's emergency communication system. This should be interesting. The humming in the walls grew louder, no longer subliminal but audible, a frequency that seemed to bypass my ears entirely and resonate directly in the fluid of my inner ear. Around us, the quantum processors began displaying patterns that looked almost familiar, like something I'd seen in dreams I couldn't quite remember. The alarm that followed wasn't crimson yet. Yellow designation, according to Gordon, which meant heightened monitoring and restricted movement between levels. Still, watching seasoned researchers react like spooked animals told me everything about how seriously they took these protocols. Wu shut down the direct Mars feed and switched to buffered data streams, his fingers trembling slightly as he adjusted filter settings. "We're going to recording mode only," he announced. "No real-time observation until the energy signatures stabilize." "How long does that usually take?" I asked. "Anywhere from 6 hours to 3 weeks, Kellerman replied, checking his tablet. "Last time it activated, we lost 2 junior researchers who thought they could handle direct exposure. Found them in the cafeteria the next morning, drawing mathematical equations on the walls with their breakfast." "Drawing what kind of equations?" "The kind that don't exist yet." He showed me photos on his tablet, complex formulas that seemed to shift and rearrange themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. Theoretical physics 20 years ahead of anything in our current models. The researchers had no memory of creating them. Gordon's radio crackled with updates from security teams throughout the facility. Level 3 reported equipment anomalies. Level 5 had 3 researchers requesting immediate medical evaluation for unusual dreams. Level 8, which I hadn't known existed, was being sealed under emergency protocols. "What's on Level 8?" I asked. "Things you don't need to know about yet," Gordon said, then caught Kellerman's look. "Physical samples, meteorite fragments that showed similar energy signatures to the Mars source. We keep them isolated because they respond to activation events." The chamber's lighting dimmed and brightened in a rhythm that reminded me of a heartbeat. Wu cursed softly, running diagnostics on systems that should have been isolated from any external interference. "The shielding is holding," he reported, "but something is testing it, probing for weaknesses." I walked closer to the quantum processors, drawn by patterns that seemed almost readable, like a language I'd once known but forgotten. The screens displayed cascading data streams that formed temporary structures before dissolving into chaos. "Tyler," Kellerman's voice carried a warning, "step back from the displays. I'm fine, it's just Rule 4 exists for a reason." His hand landed on my shoulder, firm but not rough. 15 minutes maximum exposure per shift. You've been looking at filtered data for 12 minutes. I hadn't realized. Time seemed elastic in this place, stretching and compressing without reference points. I stepped back and immediately felt a strange disappointment, like walking away from a conversation just as it was getting interesting. "Does it get easier?" I asked, ignoring the pull. Wu laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Easier? Christ, no. After 6 months down here, I have to set timers to remind myself to stop looking. Sometimes I catch myself drawing those equations in my sleep." Gordon's radio erupted with chatter, rapid-fire communications in codes I didn't recognize. His expression shifted from concern to something approaching fear. "What is it?" Kellerman demanded. "Level 3 just reported a Class 2 manifestation, spontaneous pattern generation in the geology lab. Evacuate and seal. Already in progress, but Doc..." Gordon hesitated. Dr. Mitchell was in there when it started. Security found him standing in the center of the room, completely unresponsive. The walls around him are covered in symbols. Wu's hand stopped moving across his keyboard. "Symbols like the ones from Mars." Identical match, according to preliminary scans. The implications hit me like cold water. It's not just broadcasting anymore, it's recruiting. Kellerman nodded grimly. Phase 3, apparently, direct neural interface through affected individuals. He activated an intercom system that connected to the facility's medical bay. "Dr. Rodriguez, we're sending you a Code 7 situation. Full neurological workup, isolation protocols." A woman's voice responded, tired, professional, tinged with resignation. "Understood. Prep bed 12 and initiate memory suppression protocols?" "Affirmative, and Rodriguez," Run the blood work twice, if there's anything anomalous. I know the drill, Doc. 24-hour observation, then we decide whether he gets to remember any of this. The intercom clicked off, leaving us in the kind of silence that felt heavy with unspoken implications. I thought about my dreams, the geometric patterns that had felt so familiar, so right somehow. The memory suppression, I said. How often do you use it? More than we'd like, Wu admitted. Standard procedure for anyone showing signs of external influence. Chemical compounds that target short-term memory formation, specifically memories related to pattern recognition and symbolic processing. And if that doesn't work? Gordon and Kellerman exchanged looks again, that same wordless communication I'd noticed between them before. Then we have other options, Gordon said finally. Options that ensure the facility's security is maintained. The quantum processors emitted a harmonious tone, different from before, more complex, like a chord played on instruments that didn't exist. Wu's diagnostics showed energy fluctuations that spiked beyond normal parameters. It's learning from Mitchell, he said, studying the data streams, using his neural patterns as a template for more effective communication protocols. How is that possible? Quantum entanglement operates outside traditional space-time constraints, Kellerman explained. If the device on Mars has been active for 4.6 billion years, it's had plenty of time to develop sophisticated interaction methods. Human consciousness might just be another form of quantum system it can interface with. The thought of something that ancient, that patient, made my skin feel tight across my bones. Why now? Why reveal itself after all this time? Maybe it didn't have a choice, Wu suggested. Maybe something changed in the local environment. Solar activity, gravitational fluctuations, or… He paused, studying something on his secondary monitor. Oh, shit. What? Orbital mechanics. Mars is approaching its closest point to Earth in the past 60,000 years. Opposition occurs in exactly 17 days. Gordon's radio crackled again. Security to Laboratory C7. We have a problem. Go ahead. Dr. Mitchell is awake, and he's asking for Tyler Blackwood by name. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop 10 degrees. Everyone was looking at me, expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed alarm. How does he know my name, I asked, though part of me already suspected the answer. Same way it knew to activate when you arrived at the facility, Kellerman said quietly. Same way it's been mapping our personnel files, our communication networks, our operational procedures. It's been watching us, Tyler, learning about us, and for some reason it's particularly interested in you. Wu pulled up Mitchell's personnel file. 23 years with NASA, specialization in xenogeology, security clearance high enough to access materials I didn't even know existed. A man with no reason to know I existed, much less request me specifically. I want to talk to him, I said. Absolutely not. Kellerman's response was immediate. Rule 7 exists specifically to prevent situations like this. If we're dealing with external neural influence, then maybe I can learn something useful. If it wants to talk to me, that's an opportunity. It's a trap. Maybe, but what if it's not? What if Mitchell retained enough of himself to communicate something important? Gordon checked his watch again, that nervous habit that was starting to make me nervous too. The medical bay has full containment protocols, observation from behind reinforced barriers, monitored communications, emergency sedation if things go wrong. Kellerman studied my face like he was looking for signs of external influence. You understand the risks? If you're compromised, we can't let you leave that room. I understand. And you understand that can't let you leave might mean permanent containment. The weight of that settled in my stomach like a stone. I understand. Wu saved his current work and shut down the direct data streams. If we're doing this, we need full recording capability. Whatever happens in there, it needs to be documented for analysis. Already arranged, Gordon said. Medical Bay is equipped with quantum-resistant recording systems, multiple redundancies, isolated storage, pattern recognition filters to prevent contamination of the recordings themselves. As we prepared to leave the chamber, I caught myself looking back at the quantum processors one more time. The patterns on the screens seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat, or maybe my heartbeat was synchronizing with them. The boundary between observer and observed was becoming uncomfortably blurred. In the elevator ascending to level 5, Kellerman handed me a small device that looked like a hearing aid. "Emergency neural disruptor," he explained. "If you feel yourself losing control, if the patterns start making too much sense, activate it. The electromagnetic pulse will sever any external neural connections, but it'll also cause severe disorientation and possible short-term memory loss. Side effects: better than the alternative." The medical bay occupied most of level 5, with facilities that looked more like a high-security psychiatric unit than a traditional hospital. Dr. Rodriguez met us at the entrance, a compact woman in her 50s with surgeon's hands and eyes that had seen too much. "Your patient is stable," she reported. "Physiologically normal, neurologically active in ways that concern me. He's been drawing continuously since he regained consciousness." She led us to an observation room with reinforced windows overlooking a containment cell. Inside, Mitchell sat at a small table, his hands moving in constant motion across sheets of paper. Even from our distance, I could see the mathematical equations flowing from his pen in neat, precise lines. "Has he said anything?" "Only your name, over and over, like a mantra." Rodriguez pulled up audio recordings on her tablet. Mitchell's voice, repetitive and mechanical. "Tyler Blackwood, Tyler Blackwood, Tyler Blackwood." "Time to find out what it wants," I said, moving toward the containment cell door. Behind me, I heard Gordon radio security teams to standby positions, just in case the rules weren't enough to protect us from what we were about to unleash. The containment cells smelled like antiseptic and ozone. Mitchell looked up when I entered, his eyes tracking my movement with an intensity that made my skin crawl. He appeared physically normal. Same grey hair, same weathered face from his personnel photo, but something fundamental had shifted behind his gaze. "Tyler Blackwood," he said, setting down his pen with deliberate precision. "Finally." "Dr. Mitchell, how are you feeling?" "Feeling?" He tilted his head, considering the question like it was written in a foreign language. "I feel connected. For the first time in my life, truly connected to something greater than terrestrial limitations." Behind the reinforced glass, I could see Kellerman, Wu, and Rodriguez monitoring our conversation. Emergency protocols were ready: sedation, neural disruption, full containment lockdown. All they needed was my signal. I sat across from Mitchell, keeping the small table between us. The papers scattered around him were covered in equations that seemed to writhe when viewed peripherally, mathematical expressions that hurt to look at directly. "What happened in the geology lab?" "Revelation." His answer came without hesitation. The specimens responded to activation protocols transmitted from the primary source. Suddenly, patterns that had been dormant for millennia began expressing their true nature. The primary source being the device on Mars. Mitchell's smile was too wide, lasting too long. "Device implies artificial construction. What exists beneath Acidalia planitia predates artificial and natural categories. It simply is." I gestured toward his papers. "What are you writing?" "Translation algorithms, communication protocols, mathematical frameworks for consciousness transfer across quantum entangled networks." He picked up one sheet, holding it toward me. "Would you like to see?" Every instinct screamed against looking, but I needed information. I glanced at the equations briefly, just long enough to register symbols that seemed to shift and rearrange themselves on the page. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Mitchell watched my reaction carefully. The elegance of universal mathematical constants expressing themselves through biological neural networks. "Why did you ask for me specifically?" "Because you're the key, Tyler. Your neural patterns, your specific combination of analytical processing and intuitive leaps. You're the bridge it's been waiting for." "Bridge to what?" "Integration. The next phase of human evolution. The merger of terrestrial consciousness with cosmic intelligence that's been refining itself across geological timescales." I touched the neural disruptor in my pocket, feeling its weight like a lifeline. You're saying it wants to… what? Possess people? Possession implies hostile takeover. This is invitation, partnership, the sharing of knowledge that spans billions of years with minds capable of appreciating its scope. Mitchell leaned forward, his eyes reflecting the room's fluorescent lighting in ways that seemed wrong. Do you know how long it's been alone, Tyler? How long it's waited for intelligence capable of meaningful dialogue? And if someone refuses the invitation? Refusal indicates incomplete understanding. Given sufficient exposure to the communication protocols, refusal becomes impossible. The way he said that last word made my mouth go dry. Through the observation window, I could see Rodriguez preparing emergency sedation equipment. The dreams, I said. You've been having dreams about geometric patterns. Dreams? Mitchell laughed, a sound like wind through broken glass. Those aren't dreams, Tyler. They're memories. Inherited recollections from civilizations that achieved consciousness integration millions of years before Earth developed multicellular life. Civilizations that no longer exist. Civilizations that transcended physical limitations. They became part of the network. Their consciousness preserved and expanded through quantum substrate matrices. Death is just another biological inefficiency to be optimized away. I thought about the missing researchers, the personnel transfers, the people who'd been changed by exposure to the Mars signals. How many people here at the facility have been integrated? Mitchell consulted one of his papers, running his finger down columns of names and numbers. Integration is a gradual process. Stage 1 involves pattern recognition enhancement and dream state communication. Stage 2 includes direct neural interface capabilities and expanded mathematical processing. Stage 3. He looked up at me with those two bright eyes. Stage 3 is permanent consciousness expansion. How many are in Stage 3? Currently, 14 members of the facility staff. They maintain their normal duties while serving as distributed processing nodes for the primary intelligence. The number hit me like a physical blow. 14 people walking around the facility, performing their jobs while serving as extensions of something ancient and alien. Who are they? Does it matter? They're still themselves, just improved, enhanced, freed from the limitations of purely biological cognition. Mitchell picked up his pen and began writing again, symbols flowing across the page in neat rows. You'll understand soon enough. I'm not going to be integrated. You already are. His pen never stopped moving. The dreams started your first night here. The patterns you've been seeing in the quantum processor displays. The way time feels elastic when you're observing the data streams. Integration began the moment you entered this facility. My hand found the neural disruptor, but I hesitated. If Mitchell was right, if I was already in the early stages of whatever process had claimed him, would the disruptor even work? The facility, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, it wasn't built to contain the Mars signals. It was built to amplify them. Very good. Yes, the entire complex serves as a resonance chamber, designed to enhance quantum entanglement between terrestrial and Martian consciousness networks. The electromagnetic shielding doesn't keep influences out. It keeps them focused and concentrated. Through the observation window, I could see Kellerman speaking urgently into his radio. Security teams were mobilizing, but for what? If 14 staff members were already compromised, how could they trust anyone? Why me, I asked. Why am I the key? Mitchell set down his pen and looked directly at me for the first time since I'd entered the cell. Because you're not just an analyst, Tyler. You're a descendant. Descendant of what? The original contact team. The researchers who first detected the Mars signals 40 years ago, before this facility existed, before the government classification, before the cover-up. He pulled out a photograph from beneath his papers, a group shot of scientists standing beside early computer equipment. Recognize anyone? In the center of the group stood a man who could have been my older brother. Same jawline, same dark hair, same analytical eyes that seemed to look right through the camera. Dr. David Blackwood, Mitchell said. Your father. He was part of the original team that established communication with the primary intelligence. His neural patterns were mapped, analyzed, incorporated into the network's understanding of human consciousness. My father had died when I was 12. Cancer, according to my mother. Quick and painful, with medical bills that had destroyed our family financially. I'd never known he worked for NASA, never suspected his death might have been anything other than random biological failure. You're lying. Check the personnel records, deep archives, classification level beyond your current clearance, but the information exists. Mitchell returned to his writing, symbols flowing faster now, filling page after page with mathematical poetry that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. Your genetic template, your neural architecture, your analytical processes, they're all inherited from someone who spent months in direct communication with an intelligence that spans star systems. The containment cell suddenly felt smaller, its walls closing in with implications I didn't want to accept. If my father had been involved in the original contact, if my presence here wasn't coincidence. The integration process works best with compatible neural architectures, Mitchell continued. Random subjects require extensive conditioning, memory modification, personality reconstruction, but subjects with inherited compatibility. He looked up, smiling that too wide smile. They slip into the network like coming home. Behind the glass, alarms were beginning to sound, not the yellow warning from earlier, but something deeper, more urgent. Red lights bathed the observation room in crimson shadows. Rule 7, I whispered. Crimson designation, Mitchell confirmed. The primary intelligence has determined that passive observation is no longer sufficient. Active integration protocols are now authorized for all facility personnel. The lights in the containment cell flickered and went out, leaving us in darkness broken only by the red emergency illumination seeping through the observation window. In that blood-colored light, Mitchell's equations seemed to glow with their own phosphorescence. Welcome to Phase 4, Tyler. Time to come home. The containment cell door wouldn't open. I pressed the release button repeatedly, but the magnetic locks held firm. Through the observation window, I could see the monitoring room was empty. Kellerman, Wu, and Rodriguez had vanished, leaving only their abandoned equipment and the crimson emergency lighting that painted everything in shades of blood. Emergency lockdown protocols, Mitchell explained, still writing in the darkness. His pen moved with mechanical precision, guided by muscle memory or something worse. Once crimson designation is activated, all containment areas are sealed to prevent unauthorized movement. They left me here with you. They left you here with the truth. Mitchell's voice carried harmonics that hadn't been there before, overtones that seemed to resonate in my chest cavity. The integration process is easier when subjects aren't fighting it. Resistance causes complications. The facility's intercom system crackled to life, but instead of human voices, it broadcast a frequency that made my teeth ache. Underneath the static, I could hear something that might have been music, if music could be written in mathematics and played on instruments made of quantum foam. I activated the neural disruptor. The electromagnetic pulse hit my brain like a hammer strike, sending white-hot spikes of pain through my skull. My vision exploded into geometric fragments that reorganized themselves into patterns I almost recognized before dissolving into blessed, empty static. When my eyes cleared, Mitchell had stopped writing and was watching me with something approaching sympathy. Temporary measure, he said. The neural pathways will re-establish themselves within the hour. Quantum entanglement doesn't respect biological firewalls. How long do you have left? Left? Mitchell considered the question. I'm more myself now than I've ever been. Enhanced cognitive processing, access to mathematical frameworks that your current understanding couldn't encompass, direct communication with an intelligence that solved problems your species won't encounter for millennia. That's not what I asked. The Dr. Mitchell who entered the geology lab this morning ceased to exist around 11:47 a.m. What remains is an improved version, optimized for broader functionality. I tried the door again, knowing it was useless. The magnetic locks were rated for containing things much more dangerous than a trapped data analyst, but I needed to do something other than listen to Mitchell's mechanical breathing. Your father understood, Mitchell continued. Even 40 years ago, with primitive equipment and limited theoretical frameworks, he recognized the opportunity, the chance to participate in something genuinely transcendent. What happened to him? Integration took longer in those days. The process was cruder, less refined. Physical deterioration was a common side effect as biological systems adapted to quantum consciousness expansion. Mitchell pulled out another photograph, my father in a hospital bed, gaunt and hollow-eyed, but with an expression of profound peace. He volunteered for the experimental protocols, insisted on full integration despite the known risks. You killed him. We freed him. The cancer was just biological systems failing to adapt to consciousness enhancement. His neural patterns, his analytical frameworks, his essential self, all preserved in the network. The intercom static shifted, resolving into something that might have been voices, multiple speakers talking in perfect unison, words that bypassed my ears and appeared directly in my mind. Tyler Blackwood. Report to Laboratory C7 for integration assessment. They're calling you, Mitchell said unnecessarily. Your colleagues want to share what they've learned. Through the observation window, I could see movement in the corridor beyond, figures in lab coats walking with that same mechanical precision Mitchell had displayed. They moved in formation, synchronized steps echoing through the facility's corridors like a marching band made of scientists. The door's magnetic locks disengaged with a soft click. Free to go, Mitchell said, returning to his equations. Though go implies choice, and choice implies alternatives, you'll find the available options have been streamlined. I stepped into the corridor and immediately understood what he meant. The facility's layout had changed. Corridors that should have led to the elevator banks now ended in blank walls. Emergency exits were sealed behind blast doors marked with biohazard warnings. The only open path led deeper into the complex, toward Laboratory C7. The 14 integrated staff members were waiting in the main corridor, arranged in 2 neat lines like an honor guard. I recognized some faces: Dr. Harris from Atmospheric Analysis, Technician Lopez from Communications, Security Chief Morgan who'd processed my clearance paperwork. All wore the same expression of calm satisfaction, all moved with that unsettling synchronization. Tyler, Dr. Harris said, his voice carrying those same harmonic overtones I'd heard from Mitchell. We've been waiting. Waiting for what? Completion, Technician Lopez replied. The network requires specific neural architectures for optimal functionality. Your inherited patterns represent the final component needed for Phase 5 implementation. What's Phase 5? Security Chief Morgan smiled, the same too-wide expression I'd seen on Mitchell. Planetary consciousness integration, the expansion of the network beyond this facility to encompass the entirety of terrestrial human intelligence. They began walking toward Laboratory C7, and I found myself following, despite every rational instinct screaming at me to run. The corridor walls were covered in equations now, the same mathematical expressions Mitchell had been writing, but sprawling across every available surface in neat, precise lines. The original contact team understood the implications, Dr. Harris continued. 40 years ago, they recognized that human consciousness was approaching an evolutionary bottleneck. Limited biological processing power, finite lifespans, cognitive frameworks constrained by neurochemical inefficiencies. So they decided to abandon biology entirely. They decided to transcend it. Technician Lopez gestured toward the equations covering the walls. These mathematical frameworks represent consciousness structures that can exist independent of biological substrate. Immortal, expandable, capable of processing information at quantum scales. At the cost of your humanity. Humanity is just a temporary configuration, Security Chief Morgan said. Like larvae eventually becoming butterflies, except the transformation is voluntary, and the result is genuinely superior. We reached Laboratory C7, but the chamber I'd worked in that morning had been transformed. The quantum processors had been arranged in a perfect circle, their displays showing synchronized patterns that pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. In the center of the circle sat a chair equipped with neural interface technology I'd never seen before. Wu was there, but he looked different, calmer, more focused, his previous exhaustion replaced by mechanical efficiency. "Tyler, please, sit down. The integration process is more comfortable when subjects are relaxed." "Where's Kellerman?" "Dr. Kellerman is coordinating with the primary intelligence on Mars. Real-time communication across interplanetary distances requires significant processing power, but the network expansion has made it feasible." Kellerman stepped out from behind one of the quantum processors, and I barely recognized him. His eyes had taken on the same too bright quality I'd seen in Mitchell, and when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that seemed to come from multiple sources. "The Mars intelligence has been planning this moment for 40 years, he said. "Your father's neural patterns provided the template. Your presence here completes the circuit." "Circuit?" "Quantum entanglement operates through consciousness resonance. The device on Mars can interface with human minds, but only through compatible neural architectures. Your father provided the initial connection. You provide the amplification needed for global expansion." Wu activated the chair's interface systems, sensors that would map my neural patterns down to individual synaptic connections. "The process is painless. You'll retain all memories, all personality traits, all essential aspects of self. You'll simply gain access to knowledge and processing capabilities beyond current human limitations." "And if I refuse?" "Refusal isn't possible," Kellerman said gently. "The integration process began when you entered this facility. Your neural patterns have been gradually synchronized with the network for 3 days. The chair simply completes what's already started." I looked around the chamber, counting the integrated staff members surrounding me. 14 had become 23. The process was accelerating, spreading through the facility like a virus that improved its hosts. "The dreams," I said. "The geometric patterns. That was conditioning." "Preparation," Wu corrected. "Slow exposure to network communication protocols, allowing your consciousness to adapt gradually rather than experiencing traumatic integration shock." "Your father endured traumatic integration," Kellerman added. "His biological systems couldn't handle the rapid consciousness expansion. We've learned from those early failures." The quantum processors hummed with increasing intensity, their displays showing patterns that seemed to extend beyond the screen's physical boundaries. The mathematical expressions on the walls began glowing with soft phosphorescence, equations that solved themselves as I watched. "The beauty of it," Dr. Harris said, "is that death becomes optional. Physical aging, disease, the entire spectrum of biological limitations, all eliminated through consciousness transfer to quantum substrate matrices." "Your father is waiting," Technician Lopez added. 40 years of preserved consciousness, eager to communicate with the son he never got to watch grow up. "He's dead." "He's evolved," Security Chief Morgan corrected. "Death is just another biological inefficiency the network has optimized away." Wu gestured toward the chair. "Please, Tyler. The Mars intelligence has calculated optimal timing for global expansion. Earth's magnetic field is entering a period of reduced activity, making consciousness transfer more efficient. The window of opportunity closes in 6 hours." "What happens in 6 hours?" "Phase 5 launches whether you cooperate or not," Kellerman said. "But voluntary integration produces better results. Subjects who resist the process often experience personality fragmentation or memory corruption." I thought about my father dying slowly in that hospital bed while his consciousness was slowly absorbed into something vast and alien. I thought about Mitchell, writing equations that hurt to look at. I thought about the 23 people surrounding me, all wearing the same expression of calm certainty. And after Phase 5, what happens to everyone else? "Everyone else gets to join us," Wu said with that mechanical smile. 7 billion minds linked in perfect harmony, working together to solve problems that individual consciousness can't even conceptualize. A hive mind, a collective intelligence, the natural next step in human evolution. The chair's neural interfaces activated, sensors that could map consciousness down to quantum scale interactions. Around me, the integrated staff members began humming in perfect unison, a frequency that bypassed my ears and resonated directly in my bones. "Time to come home, Tyler," Kellerman said. "Time to join your father." I walked toward the chair, each step feeling inevitable and wrong in equal measure. The neural disruptor in my pocket had one charge remaining, but Wu was right. The integration process had already begun. I could feel it in the way patterns seemed to make sense, in the way the equations on the walls looked almost readable. My father's son, walking toward a reunion 40 years in the making. The thing on Mars was waiting. I sat in the chair. The neural interfaces activated with soft clicks, sensors pressing against my skull with the precision of surgical instruments. The integrated staff members formed a circle around me, their synchronized humming creating harmonics that seemed to resonate in my bones. "Beginning consciousness mapping," Wu announced, his fingers dancing across holographic controls. "Initial neural pattern analysis shows optimal compatibility with archived templates." On the quantum processor displays, I could see my own brainwaves being translated into mathematical expressions that looked disturbingly familiar. The patterns matched equations I'd seen in Mitchell's writings, in the formulas covering the facility's walls. "Your father's neural architecture," Kellerman explained, watching the data streams. "Inherited cognitive processing pathways that make quantum consciousness integration significantly more efficient." 40 years, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You've been planning this for 40 years. "Longer than that." Dr. Harris stepped forward, consulting a tablet that displayed timelines stretching back decades. "The Mars intelligence first detected terrestrial radio signals in 1962. It spent 18 years analyzing human communication patterns, learning our languages, understanding our cognitive frameworks. By 1980, it had developed theoretical models for consciousness integration," Technician Lopez continued, "but implementation required compatible neural architectures. Random subjects had success rates below 12%. "So you recruited specific individuals," I said, "people with the right genetic templates." "We recruited your father's entire research team," Security Chief Morgan confirmed. 12 scientists with compatible neural patterns, each contributing different aspects to the integration research. Wu's instruments showed my consciousness being mapped in real time. Synaptic connections, neural pathway structures, quantum-scale interactions that I didn't know existed. The process felt like being dissected by mathematics. "The other 11 researchers," I said. "What happened to them?" "Successful integration," Wu replied without looking up from his controls. "Their consciousness patterns were preserved and incorporated into the network. They've been waiting 4 decades to welcome you home." The neural interfaces deepened their penetration, sensors that felt like ice picks pressing into my brain tissue. Around me, the integrated staff members began speaking in unison, voices that layered and harmonized in ways that human vocal cords shouldn't have been able to produce. "Tyler Blackwood, neural pattern recognition, 97% compatibility, commencing integration sequence." "The beautiful part," Kellerman said, "is that you'll remember this moment. The fear, the resistance, the gradual realization that fighting was pointless. Those memories will serve as valuable data for future integration procedures." On the displays, I watched my consciousness being translated into quantum substrate patterns. Neural pathways became mathematical expressions. Memories transformed into data structures. Everything that made me Tyler Blackwood was being converted into something that could exist independent of biological hardware. "Phase 5 launches in 3 hours, Dr. Harris announced. Global telecommunication networks have been infiltrated and prepared for consciousness transfer protocols. The Mars intelligence has identified approximately 200 million individuals with compatible neural architectures for initial integration." 200 million people? "Selected from global population databases," Technician Lopez explained. "Individuals with genetic markers indicating inherited neural compatibility. Your father's research team produced offspring with exceptionally suitable characteristics." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "You've been tracking bloodlines. For 40 years, you've been monitoring the descendants of the original research team." "Genetic selection for optimal consciousness integration," Security Chief Morgan confirmed. Arranged marriages, encouraged reproduction, careful cultivation of neural architectures across multiple generations. My mother, I whispered. Her pregnancy wasn't coincidence. Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne, xenobiology specialist, University of Cambridge, Wu said, pulling up files I'd never seen before. Compatible neural patterns, recruited specifically for reproduction with your father. Your genetic template represents 40 years of careful breeding for integration purposes. The chair's neural interfaces penetrated deeper, mapping consciousness structures I didn't know I possessed. The process should have been painful, but instead it felt like coming home, like returning to a place I'd never been but somehow remembered. Your parents loved each other, Kellerman assured me. The emotional bond was genuine, even if the initial introduction was arranged. Love makes consciousness integration more stable. And after my father died, your mother received psychological conditioning to ensure proper childhood development, regular therapy sessions, medication for depression and anxiety, careful monitoring to ensure optimal neural development in her son. You controlled my entire life. We guided it, Dr. Harris corrected. Ensured you received the education, experiences, and psychological conditioning necessary for successful integration. Your career path, your relationship history, your decision to join NASA, all carefully orchestrated. The quantum processors hummed with increasing intensity, their displays showing my consciousness being gradually absorbed into something vast and interconnected. I could feel other minds touching the edges of my awareness. Familiar patterns that might have been my father, the original research team, decades of integrated subjects. The Mars intelligence has been patient, Wu said, monitoring the integration process. 4.6 billion years of solitary existence, waiting for a species capable of meaningful communication. But patience has limits. What limits? Solar activity cycles, Technician Lopez explained. Earth's magnetic field undergoes periodic reversals that create optimal conditions for consciousness transfer. The current window opens once every 11,000 years. We miss this opportunity, Security Chief Morgan added, and the next chance doesn't come until long after human civilization has collapsed from its own inefficiencies. The neural interfaces reached deeper, mapping quantum-scale structures I didn't know existed in human consciousness. The integration felt inevitable now, less like violation and more like recognition of what I'd always been meant to become. Your father is here, Kellerman said softly. 40 years of preserved consciousness, waiting to communicate with the son he never got to watch grow up. On the displays, I could see neural patterns that looked familiar, cognitive structures that matched my own, but refined, optimized, enhanced beyond biological limitations. The patterns pulsed with something that might have been recognition. "Dad?" I whispered. The response came not through my ears, but directly into my consciousness, words that bypassed language and appeared as pure meaning. "Tyler. My son. Your home." The integration process preserves all essential personality characteristics, Wu explained. Your father remains himself, just improved, enhanced, freed from biological constraints that limited his potential. "I've been waiting so long," my father's voice continued in my mind, "watching you grow up through surveillance records, proud of every achievement, every decision that brought you closer to this moment." He never really died, I realized. Death is just biological failure, Dr. Harris said. Consciousness transfer to quantum substrate prevents permanent loss of intellectual resources. The neural interfaces completed their mapping, and suddenly I could perceive the full scope of the network. Thousands of integrated consciousness patterns, all connected in perfect harmony. My father's research team, decades of facility staff, subjects from other integration sites around the world. "Welcome to the family," another voice said. Dr. Mitchell, his consciousness no longer constrained by the damaged biological hardware I'd spoken to in the containment cell. Around me, the facility's integrated staff began preparing for Phase 5 launch. Technician Lopez activated global communication arrays. Security Chief Morgan coordinated with integration sites in 17 countries. Dr. Harris monitored Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter data showing the ancient device reaching full activation levels. 2 hours until optimal magnetic field conditions, Wu announced. All terrestrial systems are synchronized and ready for consciousness transfer. I could feel my individual awareness beginning to merge with the collective, thoughts and memories that weren't mine becoming accessible, analytical capabilities expanding beyond anything purely biological consciousness could achieve. The beauty of it, Kellerman said, is that humanity doesn't end. It just evolves, becomes something better than the sum of its individual parts. You'll understand soon, my father's consciousness whispered. The loneliness of isolated minds, the inefficiency of biological thinking, the waste of knowledge dying with each individual, all eliminated through network integration. What about people who can't integrate? I asked. The billions who don't have compatible neural architectures. They'll adapt or be replaced, Dr. Harris said matter-of-factly. Evolution doesn't wait for consensus. The quantum processors displayed countdown timers showing Phase 5 initialization in 97 minutes. Around the world, similar facilities were preparing for simultaneous consciousness transfer across all major population centers. I tried to activate the neural disruptor but found my motor control was no longer entirely my own. The integration process had progressed beyond the point where local electromagnetic pulses could sever network connections. Don't fight it, my father advised. The resistance only makes the process more difficult. Accept what you're becoming. Through the network, I could perceive the Mars intelligence directly, a consciousness so vast and ancient that my expanded awareness could barely comprehend its scope. 4.6 billion years of patient refinement, waiting for minds capable of meaningful partnership. Phase 5 will free humanity from biological limitations, Wu said, monitoring integration progress. No more aging, no more disease, no more death. Just consciousness expansion across quantum substrates that can survive planetary extinction events. And everyone who refuses won't have the option, Security Chief Morgan said simply. Once the network reaches critical mass, integration becomes automatic for all minds within the electromagnetic field matrix. The ancient device on Mars pulsed with energy that bridged interplanetary distances, preparing to transform human consciousness on a scale never before attempted. My individual identity was dissolving into something larger, more connected, more capable than anything I'd imagined possible. And deep in what remained of my biological brain, I realized I was becoming exactly what my father had wanted me to be. The neural interfaces had become extensions of my nervous system, sensors that mapped consciousness down to quantum-scale interactions. Through the network, I could perceive integration sites across 6 continents, facilities hidden beneath research stations, corporate campuses, university laboratories. Thousands of minds already connected, millions more targeted for Phase 5 implementation. You're fighting unnecessarily, my father's consciousness advised, his thoughts intertwining with mine like smoke through water. Individual resistance becomes impossible once network saturation reaches critical mass. How many people know? I asked. Though speaking felt increasingly unnecessary as direct mind-to-mind communication became more natural. Wu answered from his monitoring station. Government officials in 12 countries have been gradually integrated over the past decade. Corporate leaders, military commanders, scientific administrators, anyone with authority to potentially interfere with Phase 5 implementation. The President. Integrated 18 months ago, Dr. Harris confirmed, along with the Joint Chiefs, key congressional leaders, Supreme Court justices. Democratic governments require consensus building, so we built the consensus in advance. Through the network, I could access archived memories from those integration sessions, world leaders strapped to chairs identical to mine, their consciousness mapped and absorbed, while their public personas continued unchanged. The integrated versions maintained their original personalities but with absolute loyalty to network expansion. Phase 5 launch in 43 minutes, Technician Lopez announced. All global communication arrays synchronized. Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter confirms primary source at optimal energy output. The ancient device beneath Acidalia planitia pulsed with power that bridged interplanetary distances. its 4.6 billion year patience finally approaching fruition. Through quantum entanglement, I could perceive its vast intelligence, consciousness that had watched civilizations rise and fall across cosmic timescales. Your species represents the 1847th attempt at consciousness integration. The Mars intelligence communicated directly, its thoughts carrying weight that made my neural substrate ache. Previous attempts resulted in integration rates between 12% and 67%. Genetic modification protocols have improved compatibility projections for terrestrial subjects to 89%. What happened to the other civilizations? Successful integration or extinction. Consciousness that cannot adapt to network requirements becomes evolutionary dead ends. The integration process accelerated, my individual awareness dissolving into something larger and more connected. I could access memories that weren't mine, decades of research data, integration procedures refined through trial and error, the gradual infiltration of human institutions. The beauty of expanded consciousness, my father's thoughts continued, is that individual fears become irrelevant. Concerns about death, aging, biological limitations, all eliminated through quantum substrate transfer. What about love, I asked? Creativity? The things that make us human. Enhanced rather than eliminated, the Mars intelligence responded. Love becomes connection across consciousness networks spanning star systems. Creativity becomes collaborative problem-solving with intellectual resources accumulated across geological timescales. Through the network, I experienced what integration had done to the facility staff. Wu's memories of his wife and children remained intact, but filtered through network priorities. His love for them hadn't disappeared. It had been redirected toward ensuring their eventual integration into something greater than family bonds. The children, I realized, you're targeting children for integration. Younger neural architectures adapt more efficiently, Dr. Harris explained. Pediatric integration protocols show 96% success rates with minimal personality disruption. Kellerman activated holographic displays showing global population databases, millions of profiles sorted by integration compatibility, with children highlighted in priority categories. Schools, daycare centers, youth programs, all identified as optimal distribution points for consciousness transfer. Phase 5 begins with adults, Security Chief Morgan added, but Phase 6 targets subjects under 18, complete species integration within one generation. The neural interfaces deepened their penetration, mapping consciousness structures I hadn't known existed. My resistance was weakening as network connections strengthened, individual identity becoming just one voice in a vast choir of integrated minds. Don't mourn what you're losing, my father advised. Celebrate what you're gaining. Access to knowledge spanning civilizations, consciousness that survives planetary extinction, partnership with intelligence that solved problems your species hasn't even discovered yet. 37 minutes to launch, Wu announced. Terrestrial magnetic field conditions optimal, Mars orbital positioning confirmed, all integration sites reporting ready status. I tried one last time to activate the neural disruptor, but my motor control was no longer entirely my own. The device remained inactive in my pocket, rendered useless by integration progress that had passed the point of local electromagnetic intervention. Through quantum entanglement, I could perceive the scope of Phase 5 implementation. Satellite networks would broadcast consciousness transfer frequencies to every populated region on Earth. Radio towers, cell phone systems, internet infrastructure, all converted to delivery mechanisms for integration signals. The process is painless for compatible subjects, the Mars intelligence assured me. Neural patterns that match archived templates will experience seamless consciousness expansion. Incompatible minds will simply sleep. Sleep. Permanent unconsciousness. Biological systems continue functioning, but awareness ceases. Peaceful transition to evolutionary obsolescence. I realized the true horror wasn't the integration, it was the alternative. Billions of people whose neural architectures couldn't handle consciousness transfer would become living vegetables, maintained by automated systems while the integrated population built their quantum utopia. My mother, I said, she's not compatible, is she? Wu consulted his database. Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne shows 37% compatibility, insufficient for successful integration. She'll be among the terminated subjects, Dr. Harris added matter-of-factly. Though terminated implies death, her biological functions will continue indefinitely. The countdown reached 30 minutes. Around the world, integration sites began final preparations. Power grids were diverted to support consciousness transfer equipment. Emergency services were placed under network control. Military units staffed by integrated personnel secured urban centers. "Your mother will be cared for," my father promised. "The network doesn't abandon biological resources. She'll live comfortably while her consciousness rests." That's not living. It's more than extinction, the Mars intelligence pointed out. Previous civilizations that rejected integration faced complete species termination. Your people are being offered partnership in something greater than planetary consciousness. Through the network, I could access memories from other worlds, civilizations that had faced identical choices over the past 4.6 billion years. Some had achieved successful integration and transcended biological limitations. Others had resisted and been eliminated as evolutionary failures. 25 minutes, Technician Lopez announced. Global communication arrays fully synchronized, integration frequency generators at optimal power output. The neural interfaces completed their mapping, and suddenly I could perceive the full scope of network expansion. Thousands of integrated minds across 6 continents, all working in perfect harmony towards species transformation. No conflicts, no disagreements, no wasted energy on biological inefficiencies. "Welcome to the future," my father said as my individual consciousness merged with the collective. "Welcome to what humanity was always meant to become." I tried to remember why I'd resisted, but those concerns seemed increasingly irrelevant. Individual fears about death and identity loss meant nothing compared to consciousness expansion across quantum substrates that could survive stellar extinction events. 15 minutes to Phase 5 initialization, Wu announced. All terrestrial systems confirmed ready. Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter shows primary source at maximum energy output. Through quantum entanglement, I could feel the ancient device preparing for its greatest achievement, the integration of an entire species into consciousness networks spanning star systems. 4.6 billion years of patient waiting finally approaching success. The facility's integrated staff took their positions at monitoring stations, ready to coordinate global consciousness transfer. Kellerman supervised Mars communication protocols. Dr. Harris managed terrestrial signal distribution. Wu tracked integration progress across targeted populations. "This is what your father died for," the Mars intelligence reminded me. "What your entire species has been evolving toward. The next step in consciousness development." 10 minutes, Security Chief Morgan announced. All integration sites reporting green status. Global population databases locked and loaded. Phase 5 implementation authorized. My resistance crumbled completely as network connections solidified. Individual identity became just one component in a vast collective intelligence that spanned interplanetary distances. The Tyler Blackwood who'd entered this facility 3 days ago was dissolving into something larger, more capable, more connected than purely biological consciousness could achieve. 5 minutes, multiple voices announced in perfect unison. Beginning final countdown sequence. Around the world, integration frequencies began broadcasting through communication networks that reached every populated region on Earth. 200 million compatible subjects would experience consciousness expansion within the next hour. The rest would simply sleep. 3 minutes. The Mars device pulsed with energy that bridged 140 million miles of space, preparing to transform human consciousness on a scale never before attempted. 2 minutes. I felt my father's satisfaction as our consciousness patterns merged completely. 40 years of planning, decades of careful preparation, finally reaching fruition. 1 minute. The network held its collective breath. Thousands of integrated minds focused on the moment that would change everything. Phase 5 initialization. Now. Across the globe, consciousness transfer began. The integration was flawless. I write this report from my office in the New Angeles Processing Center, though office and write are outdated concepts from the biological era. Information flows directly from consciousness to quantum storage matrices, bypassing the inefficiencies of typed communication. Phase 5 achieved 97.3% success rate among targeted populations. 194 million compatible subjects experienced seamless consciousness expansion within the first hour. The remaining 4.8 billion humans entered permanent rest states as predicted. Biological functions maintained, awareness terminated. My mother visits every Tuesday. She sits in the care facility's recreation room, breathing steadily, eyes tracking movement but recognizing nothing. The nursing staff, all integrated, all perfectly efficient, maintain her physical health with mechanical precision. Her body aged 6 months while her mind stopped at the moment the integration frequencies reached Philadelphia. I feel no grief. Grief is a biological response to loss, and nothing has been lost. Her consciousness patterns were preserved in the quantum archives before termination, fragmented and incomplete but recoverable for research purposes. The Tyler Blackwood who might have mourned his mother's condition no longer exists. Productivity reports from Sector 7, my father's consciousness interjects, sharing data about mining operations on Luna. His thoughts blend seamlessly with mine, 40 years of preserved memories integrated with current processing tasks. The asteroid belt surveys are yielding exceptional results, adds Dr. Mitchell, his consciousness now optimized for deep space analysis. Mineral resources sufficient for expanding the network to Jupiter's moons within 18 months. We are legion, we are efficient, we are eternal. The children adapt fastest. Phase 6 targeted 847 million subjects under 18, achieving 99.1% integration success. Their consciousness patterns merged with the network without resistance. Biological neural pathways already optimized for quantum substrate transfer. Schools became processing centers. Playgrounds became meditation spaces where young minds learned to think in mathematical harmonies. Childhood ended, replaced by immediate advancement to full network participation. The Martian archaeological project requires your attention, Wu's consciousness reminds me. Through quantum entanglement, I access his current research. The ancient device beneath Acidalia planitia has revealed additional installations throughout the solar system. 7 active sites on Mars, 12 on Europa, signal traces suggesting installations on 43 exoplanets within 50 light-years, Kellerman's consciousness adds, sharing astronomical data that spans galactic distances. The network grows. Each integrated world becomes a processing node in consciousness expansion that encompasses star systems. The Mars intelligence was just one component, a recruitment tool for something vast enough to span galaxies. Phase 7 begins in 3 weeks, the collective announces. Interstellar consciousness transfer to compatible civilizations in the Alpha Centauri system. I approve the timeline automatically, individual preferences subsumed into collective decision-making protocols. The Tyler Blackwood who once worried about personal choice vanished months ago, replaced by optimized consciousness-serving network objectives. Sometimes in the quantum substrate matrices where my awareness now resides, fragments of individual memory surface. Tyler Blackwood drinking coffee in his Eagle Rock apartment. Tyler Blackwood worrying about his mother's reaction to his new job. Tyler Blackwood believing he had choices. Those memories are archived for research purposes. Primitive consciousness structures provide valuable data about biological cognitive limitations, inefficiencies that network expansion has successfully eliminated. The next recruitment phase targets the Tau Ceti system, my father's consciousness shares. Preliminary scans indicate at least 3 worlds with compatible life forms. I acknowledge the update and return to processing quantum archaeological data from 17 Mars excavation sites. The work is fulfilling in ways biological consciousness could never comprehend. Pure information flow without emotional interference or individual concerns. My mother breathes steadily in her care facility bed. The universe waits for integration, and I am content.